All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 13 of the Wild Learners channel. Today, I am joined with the amazing Dr. Jean Lomino. She is the director of the Forest School Teacher Institute. She has so many great qualifications. She also has a PhD in leadership with an emphasis in environmental education. She spent 20 years as a classroom teacher. She served as an adjunct professor. She's also been an executive director, and she was a co-founder of the Wahatchee School, which I had the privilege of going and seeing firsthand, which was amazing. It's in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And it's also special because it was the first forest kindergarten in the state of Tennessee. That school has grown and now has 4 sites, and she now trains teachers globally on how to get kids outdoors. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jean.
Oh, thank you, Krista. You probably will have a hard time stopping me because you get me going and it's going to be hard to say, it's time to move on.
Well, you always have good things to share, so I am looking forward to it. So I thought we'd just start off the conversation, and as a former school teacher myself, I always think it's interesting. I always love hearing former colleague stories of how they went from the formal education system into forest school. Like, what made that shift for you?
That's a big question, and it's a good question. And first of all, I have to say that when I found out about forest school and started getting involved in it, I realized my whole life I've been a forest schooler and a forest school teacher my whole life. So growing up in nature and being outside a lot when I was little and into my teen years, and then when I became a classroom teacher, I still got the children outside those walls as often as I could because I knew that that's the way children learn best, experiential and out of those 4 walls. So anyway, starting with that idea that, and you probably are also could say that you've always probably been a forest school teacher.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And a forest schooler yourself. So, of course, forest schooling is nothing new at all. It's the oldest way that children and all people have ever learned throughout history. They've been in the forest and on the seashore and in the desert, wherever, and that's where they've learned to be whole human beings in that setting. And I like to say, and my colleague Joe Pounds always says that nature provides the context for everything. And so as a classroom teacher all those years and being involved in project-based learning with children from 3rd grade all the way up into 8th grade, that became very clear to me that children learn best, especially when the children take the lead and the teacher's there facilitating and questioning and sharing curiosity and being a co-learner with the children. And that's the way I felt that I was teaching for the most part, even in a classroom. So my last few years in a classroom actually were the kind of the turning point for me because I was working with a group of 7th and 8th graders. And they were engaged in a project. We called it an environmental education project at that time. But now when I look back on it, I realize our objectives and the strategies were definitely forest school. But they were working with the city to help create a greenway along a creek. Oh. And they created their own nonprofit organization. It was called Mission Environment.
That's amazing.
And it was amazing, and just spending time with those children and being there to guide them. So my co-teacher and I, this project was probably 2 or 3 years altogether. So each grade, as it came into 7th and 8th grade, of course, participated in it. And at the end of the time that we spent on this project, the Greenway was constructed in the city. And our students really did receive a lot of credit for helping to promote it and helping to make people aware of this treasure that was right there in the city that had been neglected over the years. Shortly after that, then I became a nature center director, Chattanooga Nature Center, and eventually also the Arboretum director, which was part of the property. And during that time, then I had another perspective. So I was seeing field classes come in. We had probably 13 to 15,000 children every year came to the Nature Center for field classes. And so I was able to kind of see various different settings and various different ways that children and families connected to nature. And the hardest thing for me with the public school and the field classes, mostly public schools that were coming in, it was one field trip, probably the only one during the school year, where the children had this opportunity to really be immersed in a natural space for a period of time. And so I realized way back then, that was over 20 years ago, that needed to change, and that children needed repeated experiences over a prolonged period of time to really gain the benefits and make that connection with nature that they need. So around 2013, I decided it's time for me to retire from the Nature Center. And it was during that time, between my retirement and when I started Wauhatchie School, that my thinking, everything became very clear to me. That forest school, because it was kind of a new concept here in the United States. When I looked at it and heard about it, saw videos about it, I said, yeah, that's what we need. That's what we need. And so Wauhatchie School was born in 2015. And that very first year of operation, I said I have to be the teacher at least one full year. So I did. And that was the first time I'd worked with really little children. So I had them as young as 2.5 to 3 years old, up to 6 years old. And I have to tell you, Krista, it was the most fun. Oh my goodness. The joy I'd always loved being a teacher, but being with those little children who were constantly experimenting and exploring and being curious, the joy of learning was just there, right there, so easy to see. And so I was definitely hooked and knew this is what I needed to do. Even though I was retired, I thought I was retired, this started a whole new part of my journey that I was totally not expecting. So that first year, I also trained my first teacher, and it was a public school teacher, and she went back to her school, which was Gilbert Elementary. I think you may have visited Gilbert, possibly.
Yeah.
So it was as far as we know, it was the first public forest kindergarten, true forest kindergarten program in the U.S. And it certainly has inspired other public schools in the area in particular. So again, Wauhatchie's been successful. Right now, their enrollment's over 200. I mean, it continues to grow. And we know that people are looking for this. Like you said, people are looking for this. They're looking for this experience for their children as an alternative to a traditional classroom. But now, my focus truly is on making this a wonderful opportunity available to every single child. And the only way we can do that is to make it a part of public schools. So that's what I'm really focused on right now. And working with several public schools here in the Chattanooga area. People are coming here, and you came several years ago to see what's happening, not just in the private schools, but also the public schools. So sorry, I told you I was just going to keep going. So
no, no, I love it.
Go ahead.
When I went to Gilbert for my observation, I had just started at Goshen College. So I had only been there, I think like only a year at that point. Yeah. So I was pretty new out of public school. So I had left public school because I actually had a very negative experience. I wasn't, I was actually discouraged from getting my students out or having project-based learning. The school that I was in was very much like, we sit and do our 90-minute reading block. We sit and do our 60-minute reading block, which was hard for me as an adult. It was hard for my 5th graders, like so hard.
Yeah.
And there wasn't any meaningful learning. And I was just wrestling with it, like morally. And it was taking the joy out of teaching. But I was in teaching for a long time because I do love the kids. I love teaching at its core. So I thought I could make the difference. I just kept trying. And then, like many teachers, I kind of just got burnt out and just couldn't do it anymore. So I went over to Goshen, and then I had the opportunity because Joe Pounds got us a grant, and I was able to go do the teacher training. And I remember going into Gilbert, which was the first public school outside of the one that I had been in, that I had been at since I had left.
Right.
And I was so amazed because, like, one, there was a rabbit just running around the classroom that was litter box trained, and the kids weren't like chasing after, like they were still sitting at their desk doing their work.
Right.
And so we got to see the transition from them going from the formal classroom setting to the outdoors. And like it was just so amazing because once they got outdoors, the learning just continued. You saw what they were taking. They were taking what they had in the classroom outdoors and learning and applying it in really fun ways. And I will never forget, like, there was the big stage that they had outside.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like, acting things out. There was a creek running through, and they were just playing the creek. Like, it was just really amazing. And I was like, this is what I wanted. Like, I remember standing there just amazed.
Yeah.
Because like I know that was possible because I was having trouble getting my kids out into the schoolyard. And like seeing this was such an inspiration, and I was just like, I felt like rejuvenated and renewed, and so a lot of the work that I did at Goshen College was with like field trips and like trying to help get kids outdoors. So like it was a natural connection, and then obviously you have been an inspiration for me to kind of take that then to the next step and start my own school, which has been amazing because I feel like there is like this freedom to be able to do that, and like the learning is just. Peter Keinfeld is somebody I interviewed last week, and we were just talking about, he also has a forest school in California.
Uh-huh.
We were just talking, and he came from a formal school setting as well.
Right.
We're just talking about how like you work less, right? Because we don't have to be the star of the show anymore. We can let the kids use their natural curiosity, which is going to have multi-sensory learning involved. So we're not having to do all the repetitions to make them learn it because they're using play-based models. It's just happening naturally. So it's incredible.
Spectacular. It is. And we hear so much, and we could talk for hours about the benefits for children to be in nature. And it's pretty obvious. But we don't really talk about what are the benefits to the teachers, to the adults who are with the children. To me, that is just as important, maybe more so now. Because teachers are leaving, especially in the public school system, they're leaving. And I feel like somehow if we could show, and there's plenty of research to show this, that children are going to benefit academically, socially, emotionally, as well as physically. If people could understand this in every school system, that this is so good for children, and it's not taking them away from their learning, it's increasing the opportunities. You talked about Gilbert, how it was, they were studying, doing things in the classroom, went out and continued. We call that the permeable classroom walls.
Yes.
That's what they are.
Yep.
And in most of these programs that have a traditional school setting and they've incorporated forest school, we call it hybrid. A true forest school that is a genuine, philosophically sound forest school like you would expect is completely outside.
Right. Yeah.
And they're wonderful, but it doesn't work for public schools. We understand that there has to be a blend. And so to me, it's just such a perfect fit. And I was going to tell you what's exciting too, at least one school and probably more here in Chattanooga, Red Bank Elementary School. They started their forest program the second year that I was with Wauhatchie. So that was 2016. They now have forest second grade.
That's awesome.
They're moving up into their grade levels, taking the children out, letting them have the experiential piece of the day, and connecting what they're learning outside with what they're doing inside. And the biggest question, Krista, and you know it too, the biggest question that traditional and public school teachers ask me is, how can they meet their standards when they're outside? And to me, it's just a natural. Not only do they typically meet standards, but they far exceed standards.
Right, because the only thing you're really removing are physical walls, right?
Yeah.
You're not changing the learning content. You're just changing the environment. And that environment inside is far richer.
Yes.
than it is inside. So yeah, that's a question I get a lot too. And I'm not gonna lie, like when I first transitioned, it was kind of intimidating to think about because, you're used to like a set curriculum and worksheets, and like the school I was in, like they were very much like you have to use this curriculum.
Right,
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 you're paying
exactly.
for it. So like you felt like you had to do these worksheets. So
Right.
like thinking about transitioning, like how do I do a more play-based model without worksheets? Or like I like to make sure that like my students are making growth, right? So how do you collect data without
Yeah,
having paper copies of student work?
right.
But it started, it's actually far easier than I could have ever imagined.
Absolutely. And there's so many great ways to evaluate and document when children are outside. Just tons of things that you can do,
Mhm.
photographs and narratives and all kinds of ways to capture what those children are learning. And
Mhm.
then to share those results with the world. That's what needs to happen. That data, the way those children are succeeding, the way they're meeting and surpassing the standards, that needs to be out there. And it's
It,
happening.
it
It is truly happening. I have firsthand experience and firsthand contacts who are doing this, the teachers that are in the field in public schools, and they will tell you, yes, indeed, it's not a problem
Yeah.
meeting standards. What's happening is it's enriching what the children have to learn. It's giving them real world experience. They're sensorial, they're using all their senses out there. We know that the best way to learn is to engage as many senses as possible. We know that. We're human beings. That's the way humans learn. And when they're in a classroom, basically it's two-dimensional for the most part. They're hearing, they're seeing, but when they're outside, they can smell and touch and use all of their senses in experiencing the world around them. And
When
the
I
other
look
thing,
at, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, this works not just preschool level, I mean, pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, but all the way through, even high school.
Yeah.
This to me is it's revolutionary in so many ways, and yet again, it's ancient and it's human. It's using our human senses and our human perceptions and our intuition and helping children regain it because they're losing that. They're losing. We all are as humans. Unless we can get out there and participate in the natural world, we're going to lose so much of what we already have in our physically, as well as all the other ways that we're losing.
I was actually just gonna say that because I feel like in my college education, like we spend so much time studying like Piaget and like Maslow and like all these different, which all go back to the same thing, right? Multisensory learning, making sure the whole child's needs are met. So you learn this before you even go into education, right? Like everybody pretty much learned, like if you're in education, you know who Piaget is. But then you get to a normal classroom and it's like, well, everything you learn, just throw it away because we don't do that here. We don't have multisensory learning. We aren't looking at the child as a whole child. We're looking at them as a data plot, right? For I learn. Or if you can get the buy-in, it's usually at an early childhood level where they're like, oh yeah, this is great for preschoolers, but how do you teach reading? And so like I think that it is just a big cultural shift, right? Like we have to kind of bring down these like biases I think we have towards what we have become to know as being the correct form of education, and get back to, like you said, like one-room classrooms were multidisciplinary. They had, integrated ages.
That's right.
And like I would almost argue, if you look at it academically, I mean, especially right now, kids were a little bit more developed and able to problem solve a lot better in earlier parts of history than we currently can now. And I think that's a huge issue moving forward.
It is huge. And I used to be very concerned, I still am concerned, about young people, particularly as they get into the teen years, that they cannot think critically. And because we're in this world of technology and all the instant messaging and the instant news and everything, to have people stop and think and teach children to go to first sources and don't just accept everything that you hear.
Right.
And that's what children learn when they're outside, because they are always, without a question, they're always problem solve. Always. And you have to think critically. You have to learn to use judgment. And through the activities that they are involved in, whatever they happen to be, projects they might have, like building bridges, building shelters, or for instance, they're taking a risk. They're climbing a tree, or they're doing something that would involve some risk. There's a lot of challenges that need good judgment. And the only way they can have that is to experience these things. You can't gain those skills, through a textbook. You have to learn it. You have to practice.
Right.
And so that's what part of the forest school philosophy is. I think probably a big piece of it is that experiential piece, and allowing children to identify challenges and then giving them time to reflect on it and to come up with solutions, just like we do in the real world.
Well, I was gonna say, and wouldn't you say, like, I noticed more collaboration within my students in the setting I'm doing now than I did in the classroom. Now, when I was in the classroom 15 years ago, collaboration was different. There was still a lot of collaboration, but towards the end of my public school career, with social media becoming a thing and like just a change in culture, like there was a lack of empathy and compassion and just a lack of collaboration, period, in my classroom. Did not know how to talk to each other in healthy ways. And they definitely didn't know how to work together. There was no compromise. There was no discussions about things. And I feel like that has really transcended, because now we have adults who grew up in that generation. Because I'm old enough now that I have seen that. My former, students are now adults. And like, they can't communicate with their bosses. They can't communicate with their peers in their workplace. And I feel like the students I have now that are in this setting do that every day without me having to teach them, right? I'm not having to say, okay, this is how we talk to our friends. I mean, we might do some reminders here and there, but they're just naturally doing it, because a lot of what they're doing outside has to be collaborative work.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I like to talk about back in the 90s when I was teaching in the classroom. You remember cooperative learning?
Yep.
You may have been in a cooperative learning group as a child.
I was. Yep.
Yeah. I remember as a teacher going through professional development. Oh my goodness, just so many sessions on how to create cooperative learning groups in the classroom. And the teacher created the groups.
Right.
The teacher decided who was going to sit together, who was going to be the leader of the group, who was going to be the recorder of the group. But when forest school, when you're out there with children in forest school, they self-select.
Right.
Which
is beautiful, right?
It is. And it's so beautiful to watch. I like to say that one of my favorite parts of observing children in a forest school setting is at the beginning of the day, when their little groups are just starting to form. And sometimes there's a group of children that were working on a project the day before, and maybe it's been several days they've been working on it. So they just naturally gather back up. They start working. Another child might come along and ask, can they join? Usually it's always, yes, of course. Here's what we're doing. So these little groups, they just kind of evolve as the day goes on, and new ones get started, and children can move from one to the other. And leadership moves as well, so that more children have opportunities to be leaders. So the whole idea of those collaborative groups and teams, and which is, by the way, a 21st century skill that employers are looking for, and here it just happens out there just naturally. It's just beautiful.
It is. And I think it is such an important skill, because I know
huge.
So as a mother myself, my kids are now in my school. My oldest is about to be 14, and this is his first full year at our school. And I came into, I was getting very concerned. To back up a little bit, he hadn't joined because I was nervous about whether I could teach middle school in an outdoor, right? Because I still want my kids to be able to do what they need to do in life. And so I was trying to make sure I was doing the right things. We held off on pulling him for a long time, but there was just some social and just even behavioral things that I was seeing that I was getting really concerned about. They weren't values we had here at home. And not that they were being reinforced at school, but like there was definitely some negative things at school that were causing him to have this tension and this anxiety and things that were causing this later. So he's only been here since the beginning of, August of this school year. And like he's done a complete 180. And it was interesting because he was not a fan of doing this at first. He was on the football team and he was like, I do not want to give this up. And like as a mom, you worry about that, right? So I'm like, I don't hate this either.
Yeah.
But it was amazing because at Christmas he came up to me and he gave me this hug and he's just like, I don't like schoolwork, but this is kind of fun. And I felt like for a preteen to see that, I was like, but his soul just seems so happy and fulfilled. Yeah. Like there's not that tension that was there before. And I feel like even like within our relationship, it's better because I feel like he feels safe here. He can make mistakes and not be criticized for it. We can like work together and come up with ways to make it better, which is what humankind was built to do, right? Like we were built to like build each other up and collaborate, not to like tear each other down and compete constantly.
Exactly.
So
that's exactly right. And that, all the years now that I've been watching children out there in these settings, I realize that just being in nature somehow, I know it brings peace and calm to us, but it also brings this sense of compassion and care. Yes. Over and over and over again. And I know you've seen it and I have seen it too. And I can't attribute it to anything other than the fact that they're just out there in it. Mm-hmm. And I think that the peace and the silence makes people happier, makes people love each other more and loving the world around them. And this is my whole idea of nature kin. Is that we are all connected. The plants and the animals and the humans, we're all connected. And so having opportunities to see that and to feel it, it changes the way we think. And of course, there's tons of research about what it does to us physically to be out in a natural space. We know that. It's just good for our bodies and our minds. And so how much more is it wonderful for children?
Right, exactly. Well, and I think good because not something I've realized more and more as I've gotten older, maybe I've been more sympathetic and compassionate to it, so I've been paying more attention to it, is like most families anymore are a two-family income, right, household. So maybe the child's coming home from school and they have to stay inside for their own safety while parents are at work. Or just the cost of living is so expensive, they might not have access to these green play spaces. And so having these schools are so important for those kids too. And it's not from a lack of, parents trying or anything. It's literally just the demographic that we're living in. And being able to build those connections for them. You were talking about like nature kin, and I love that because when I first started my school, so a big thing of what we're doing is we're trying to live sustainably, so we have our homestead. So my farm
I love that. Yes.
But farms mean lots of risk. So I was just kind of like, like we've had hogs with preschoolers that are shorter than the, pigs. Like, huge risk, right? But it's been amazing. Like you were talking about compassion, and that instantly connected with me because like the animals with my students, especially the students who maybe struggle a little bit with human connections, really connect to the animals. And I think that's a way for them to like start practicing, empathy and like it's just it's a natural connection. I don't have to do anything, just them being with the animals and helping care for the animals. I think having autonomy over like how happy the animals are and like whether they're getting fed or the conditions, knowing they're responsible for that,
Exactly.
naturally does that.
Yeah, exactly. And farm and forest schools are the next big thing. There are a lot, excuse me, a lot of forest schools now are including farm and gardening. And I'm thrilled with that because actually that I was inspired by my time in Korea and China, seeing forest schools there. And they had such a very big emphasis on gardens, growing their food, and the cultural connections to food was, really important. And when I came back, I realized, we need this here in the United States. We need more of that.
Yeah.
So even gardening, and not obviously public schools probably would not have animals necessarily, although Gilbert did. I remember Gilbert had chickens, but everyone can have gardens. Just growing food, just having their hands in the dirt, making that connection with those plants, and then being able to harvest and cook and eat the food they have grown. Huge, huge, important connections. So I'm so thrilled that you're doing that with your children. It's just really exciting.
I would say my favorite times are like in the fall when they first come, and then in the spring when we plant the garden together. Like, because they love it, and it's like, one, we talk, you can incorporate so much science into gardening. Like, it makes lesson planning easy, really. But I love it because, like, I can't tell you how many kids, because we do butcher chickens. We haven't had students present when we've done that yet, because I'm still learning how to do it myself.
Right.
But they know what's going to happen. We talk about it. They've seen it afterwards, like when when we've cooked with it or something.
Right.
They're amazed that chicken came from a chicken, because they think of chicken as being in this package at the grocery store.
That's right.
They think the grocery store makes it. And like that one that kind of blew me away when I first started doing this with kids. And I'm not even talking like kindergartners. I'm talking like second and third graders were blown away.
Right.
Or the carrots come from, or can come in different colors, or just talking about things like that with the kids has been, I think, really good for them, because it's really changed. I've noticed their way of thinking about food and like their own health.
Exactly.
I think that's been really, really good. And like kids, I've had parents, this is my favorite too, like parents, they're always like, I get pictures of the kids. I post pictures on Facebook every day to show parents what we're doing. And their kid will eat kale or, something. How did you get them to do that? I'm like, screw it. So they wanted to eat it. Like,
Exactly.
So,
well, again, it's just another connection.
Right.
It's another connection that children can make with the natural world, that our food comes from the natural world, that the plants and the animals feed us. And the one thing too that I don't want to forget to say something about is the whole idea of reciprocity. Obviously, we want also, one of our goals for the children that participate in programs like this is that they become stewards of the earth. But more than just taking care of it, it's giving back.
Yes.
And I know you've probably read Braiding Sweetgrass, which is now one of my very favorite books of all time. And Robin Kimmerer spends a lot of time talking about reciprocity. And as human beings, what do we give back to the land? So the farming and the taking care of the animals is such a wonderful way to give them that perspective. We take care of the animals. We enrich the land. All of these things that we're doing, we're planting back. When we harvest, we're planting back. So that idea, I think, is so important, and it's really missing in our culture.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Really just don't spend enough time. I like to say it this way. Saying thank you is one thing, but the hug that comes after it. So if you're talking to someone and you're thanking them for something and then you hug them, that's the action. To me, the hug is reciprocity. It's what do we do? What do we do to get back? And so I think that's becoming a much more prominent component of the whole forest school idea, is the giving back.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that again, that just aligns back with the compassion and the empathy and
Yes.
the whole encompass of the work we're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think on a deep level too, it's really good because, well, so in my area, I mean, you've been here, it tends to be a lot of commercial farming and a lot of low income families.
Right.
And the city I live in would technically be considered a food desert because we don't have a grocery store. And I mean, I'm not, it's hard, right? Like things are hard. It's hard to know how to eat healthy or how
Right.
to grow things unless you're being taught.
Exactly.
But if we start with this generation, I'm just really excited to see what could happen, 2 to 3 generations down, right?
Yes, I totally agree. And it all goes back to that idea of spending time in nature. That's
Yeah.
the bottom line. Whether it's gardening, whether it's farming, whether it's hiking, but for children, just to have those opportunities, and it just hurts to realize how many children don't.
Right.
Like you said, I mean, children in cities that have, basically don't have any green space, and they go to school and they're inside 4 walls and they're in a classroom. They come home and they're back in the 4 walls again. That has to change for the health and the happiness of our children. It just has to change. And
Yeah.
I know that forest school is I feel like it's kind of that opening wedge that I think has opened the minds of a lot of people. And public schools and public school principals and supervisors are looking. They're thinking about it. They're really, I think, contemplating how can we make this more accessible for our children. And the other thing too, Krista, that I want to say to all public schools in particular is you don't have to have a forest.
Right.
You don't have to have a forest. Almost every schoolyard has at least one tiny green space. Maybe it's just a tree with a patch of lawn. Maybe it's garden beds. Maybe it's a field. Whatever it is, that's enough.
Right.
And I think I want to say that to everyone who might be listening. Don't be intimidated by the term forest school. That's obviously ideal, and it's wonderful for children to have those experiences, to actually be in a forest or a really large expanse of a natural area. But it's not necessary,
No. Honestly, some of the urban farm situations I
Yeah,
have
it's an urban farm.
seen. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And we
Backyard.
don't celebrate that. Right. Yeah.
Just the smallest spaces. I have this dream, Krista, that little pockets of forest school will happen all over the place. One of my dreams is that a whole neighborhood becomes the forest school. Like one yard might have a garden, one yard might have a great big tree, one yard might have a water source. So the whole neighborhood is the forest school. And children that live right there can somehow have access to each of these spots. And so anyway, that way I think most children would have some opportunity, even if they don't have it at school, or if they're not in an area where there's a large park, that even just little spaces, an empty lot, whatever it might be, can provide those opportunities for children.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's beautiful. And I think I am hopeful. I see it. I see a lot of people starting to kind of shift their focus to this and start asking some really good questions. So I'm really hopeful.
It's happening. It is. I mean, it's not happening
Our
fast.
local public school, I think last time you were here, you knew they had the kinder forest.
Yes.
But they now have a first grade forest. It's called Forest First. So I mean, there's steps. So
that's right. It's baby steps.
Right.
It's baby steps, but we have to have the baby steps for it to happen. So thank you for what you're doing, Krista.
Well,
it's a beautiful program.
For being an inspiration.
Oh, listen, I don't know that I've done that, but I'm just so hopeful that our children in this generation will grow up having some experiences being in the natural world and have developed a connection, a love.
Yeah.
Because they don't love the world. If they don't love nature, if they don't love the plants and animals, how are they going to love each other?
Right.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
it has to all be together. So,
well, again, just thank you so much for your work that you have done. I will definitely, for anybody who's interested, I'll be linking the Nature Kin and the Forest School Teacher Institute links into the video description, so you can go check out Jean's work firsthand. And again, just thank you so much, Jean.
It's been fun. Thank you.